Hope was never the opposite of fear. Aurora had learned on the longest night of her life that hope was fear carried with both hands, teeth clenched, breath measured, while the world tried to pry your fingers open. She had once believed safety meant walls, vows, and a mate's voice at her shoulder. By dawn, she believed only in movement, one step, then one more, until her body failed or mercy found her first. The mountain wind cut through wool, grief, and stubbornness alike, and still she kept walking, because two small heartbeats answered every time she pressed her palm to her belly. Frostborn sentries found her just beyond the lower boundary stones, half kneeling in old snow and gravel. One hand curled around a leather satchel, the other wrapped so tightly around a signet ring that the metal left crescents in her skin. Her cloak was stiff with dried mud and darker stains. Her boots had split at both seams. Her lips were cracked enough to bleed when she spoke. "Do not take the satchel," she whispered. "Take me. Take this to your king. Not your council. Your king." The older sentry, broad-shouldered and gray at the temples, crouched without touching her. He looked at the ring in her fist, then at the crescent-mark seal burned into the satchel flap. Blood moon crest. His jaw tightened. "Can you stand?" Aurora nodded and failed on the first attempt. Pain knifed through her lower back and wrapped hard around her middle. Not labor, she told herself. Not now. She swallowed against panic. Her baby had kicked an hour ago. Strong, insistent, alive. A younger guard reached to lift her and drew back when she flinched. "She's freezing through." "I said no counsel," Aurora rasped. "If you hand this to an elder, I die before dusk." "Who did this to you?" the older one asked. She met his gaze with eyes gone hollow from shock and sleeplessness. "Men carrying treaty marks that should not exist. Men who knew my route before I left home. Men who cut down my mate and called it border discipline." By the time they got her inside the fortress infirmary, her legs shook so violently she could not trust them. Heat hit her skin like a blow. Cedar smoke, boiled herbs, hot iron, clean linen, and wolf scent layered beneath it all. Healers moved around her with practiced speed, cloak removed, wet gloves cut away, skin checked for frostbite. Questions pressed at her from every side. Name, pack. How far along? Any prior complications? When did the cramps begin? Where was the bleeding? That last word made her jerk. There had been spotting after the road attack, no more than streaks, but enough to chill her marrow. Aurora blood moon. 5 months. No prior losses. Cramping since midnight. Husband dead. Ambush at Raven's Pass. Evidence in satchel. Must speak to King. She answered because answering kept her upright. Then the infirmary door opened and quiet spread outward from it like a command. Dr. Elidra Sorn entered in white and slate healer robes, iron pins at her throat denoting royal appointment. Her face was elegant and remote, her smile too small to be called kind. She skimmed Aurora once, from matted dark hair to swollen belly to torn hem, and spoke to the room instead of to the patient. "Clear the bay. I will examine her privately." The aides obeyed. The older sentry hesitated. Aurora seized his wrist with surprising force. "Stay." Elidra did not look up from the basin where she scrubbed her hands. Infirmary protocol does not bend for strangers. "I am not a stranger," Aurora said, though she barely sounded like herself. "I carry sealed evidence of a border assassination." "Then you are a political problem." Elidra dried her fingers, each movement precise. "And political problems are noisy. Pregnancy loss is quieter." The words did not register all at once. They landed in pieces, sharp and delayed. Aurora's stomach turned. "What did you say?" "I said lie back." The examination was brisk and rough enough to draw a broken cry from her throat. Elidra's touch was clinical in the way a blade was clinical, efficient, unsoftened by concern. Aurora bit the inside of her cheek to keep from shouting. Sweat slicked her neck. Her vision blurred, cleared, blurred again. When Elidra finally stepped back, she removed her gloves and spoke with flat certainty. No fetal heartbeat, tissue instability. You are carrying a non-viable fetus. We should administer cleansing tincture immediately. The room tilted. Non-viable. No. No. I felt movement. I want another healer, Aurora said. Her voice trembled and steadied by force. Now. Elidra's expression did not shift. Your mate is dead. Your pack position is compromised. And you crossed into sovereign land during armed dispute. You do not have the standing to make demands. Aurora stared at her, hearing her husband's laugh from 3 nights ago, warm and careless by the campfire. Hearing steel strike steel, hearing his last choking breath as he shoved the satchel into her hands and told her to run. Her fingers spasmed around the signet ring until pain shot up her hand. You are lying, Aurora said. Elidra set a dark glass vial on the tray between them. I am saving you from sepsis, disgrace, and difficult decisions. Drink. Get out, Aurora whispered. The doctor sighed as if faced with a stubborn child. Hold her shoulders. 2 attendants moved, eyes apologetic and terrified. Aurora twisted, kicked, nearly slid from the narrow bed. Heat pulsed beneath her skin, not fever now but alarm so sharp it felt like light behind her ribs. She had survived the road. She had survived the night. She would not survive a cup in a healer's hand. Aurora slammed her elbow into the nearer attendant's chest, tore free, and staggered to her feet. The floor lurched under her. Her belly tightened again, painfully hard. Stop her, Elidra snapped. If she collapses in the corridor, that is on her. Aurora hit the door with her shoulder, caught the frame, and pulled herself into the passage. Stone walls, torchlight, too bright, voices rising, boots pounding somewhere distant. Her breath came ragged. She could taste copper. Run, then. Run until your knees break. Better that than dying obediently. She made it 6 steps before the contraction seized hard enough to fold her. A hand caught her wrist just before she struck the floor. Easy. The voice was low, roughened at the edges, controlled by habit rather than calm. Aurora looked up into a face she recognized from war briefings and border rumors. Alpha King Corvus Frostborn, fur-lined black cloak thrown over one shoulder, dark hair wind-tossed, gaze like winter steel warmed in fire. He should not have been there. Kings did not wait outside infirmary corridors. He steadied her with one hand and went very still. Heat surged from the place where his skin touched hers, swift as lightning and just as merciless. It raced up her arm, across her chest, into her throat. Her lungs locked. Beneath her ribs, pressure bloomed bright and startling, as if moonlight had poured directly into her blood. Panic and want collided so violently she almost gagged on it. Not now. Not after death. Not with another man's ring carved into my palm. Corvus's pupils narrowed. Amber brightened at the center of his irises and silver edged outward, predatory and stunned. The corridor quieted in an instant. Dominants nearby lowered their gaze without being told. He released her wrist only to drop to one knee in front of her and press his ear, reverent and intent, to the curve of her abdomen. Elidra had reached the doorway by then, voice sharpened with outrage. Your Majesty, she is unstable and delusional. She requires immediate silence, Corvus said, and the words struck stone like a gavel. He listened for 3 heartbeats of his own, then 4. Aurora gripped the wall and watched his expression change from concentration to a fury so cold it steadied her better than comfort could have. There are 2, he said quietly, still kneeling. 2 strong rhythms, not 1. Elidra laughed once, brittle. Stress can create auditory error even in trained. Corvus rose in a single controlled movement and faced the corridor, voice carrying to every doorway, every stairwell, every listening ear. Dr. Elidra Sorn is stripped of title, station, and authority effective now. She is confined under guard for malpractice and suspicion of treason pending tribunal. If any hand in this fortress sought to silence unborn heirs within my walls, that hand has declared war on my crown. Shock cracked through the infirmary. Metal rang as a guard dropped his spear butt to the floor in salute. Someone cursed under their breath. Someone else began praying to the moon under a whisper. Elidra's composure finally fractured. You would choose a border widow over your own physician? Corvus did not raise his voice. I chose what I can hear. He turned back to Aurora and, before touching her again, held his hand out, open, waiting for consent. She stared at his palm, broad and scarred and steady, and at the ring still embedded in her own fist. The corridor smelled of cedar and fear and snowmelt drying on stone. Mine to protect, he said hoarsely, for her alone though everyone heard, never to own. The twins kicked, hard and simultaneous, and Aurora closed her eyes against the sudden sting of tears she had not permitted herself since the road. She placed her hand in his. Her fingers disappeared inside his grip, and the contact changed from simple balance to a living current that climbed her arm and settled low in her abdomen, where two small rhythms answered it like drums behind a wall. Corvus closed his hand only after she did, as if she had given him not her weight, but a vow he intended to honor precisely. Behind them, armor scraped stone as guards moved on Elidra. The doctor's voice cut through the corridor, cultured composure cracking into shrill disbelief. You cannot confine me on the word of a displaced widow. Corvus did not look away from Aurora. I can confine you on intent, opportunity, and a vial prepared before consent was given. Captain Ivar, chain of custody. The vial, her records, every tonic in her rooms, every ledger tied to her seal. A dark-haired captain with a scar through one eyebrow bowed his head. At once, my king. Aurora swayed. Corvus shifted closer, then stopped himself a handspan short of her body. May I? She nodded, too tired for speech, and he set one steadying hand at her elbow. Even that careful touch made her pulse jump. The corridor had filled with faces now, healers clutching folded linens, sentries from the lower gate still dusted with road grit. Two elder women in mourning gray, and three young trainees who looked at Aurora with naked terror and curiosity. She had crossed this threshold expecting to die unknown. Instead, people watched as if her breath had become a public matter. I am standing in a king's hall with mud on my hem and my dead mate's ring in my fist, and every eye is on my belly. I should pull away. I should keep what remains of myself hidden and armored and hard. But he asked before touching me. He listened when no one else did. If I fall now, I fall in front of all of them, and I still do not know whether this kingdom is refuge or another kind of cage. Corvus lifted his chin toward the older sentry who had found her at the boundary stones. You brought her in? Yes, my king. You did right. Remain as witness. No one who touched her case leaves this wing until statements are taken. The sentry struck his fist over his heart. Relief moved through his posture so quickly Aurora felt it like a draft. Elidra laughed again, harsher this time, as two guards took her arms. You are making policy from a mating frenzy. Look at your own eyes. At that, Corvus finally turned. Something ancient looked out through his face, disciplined but near its edge, and even bound, Elidra flinched. If this were frenzy, he said, you would already be dead. Be grateful I still prefer law. He gestured, and the guards hauled her down the corridor. Her protests echoed off the vaulted ceiling, then thinned into distance. Silence settled in the space she left behind, the kind that arrived after lightning, when everyone measured what had been struck. Corvus faced Aurora again, his voice lowered, roughened by restraint. You're shivering. I need you seated before those cramps worsen. There is a private chamber beside the nursery ward. Warm, quiet, guarded. No one enters without your word or mine. My satchel, she said immediately. And the ring. Both stay with you. His gaze dropped to her white-knuckled fist. Can you open your hand? She tried. Pain shot through her palm, where the signet's edges had cut crescents deep enough to bead red. Corvus did not pry. He simply covered her clenched hand with his and breathed once, slow and deliberate, as if lending his rhythm to hers. The tight muscles in her fingers loosened a fraction. Enough for air, enough for the ring to shift. There, he murmured. No one is taking him from you. The words hit harder than command or comfort should have. He did not ask who him meant. He understood. They moved. Not quickly. The corridor seemed longer now that her knees trembled with every step. Frostborn architecture rose around her in dark stone and carved cedar. Wolves etched into lintels, moon phases inlaid in silver across the floor. Torches burned with blue-white resin, clean and bright, and the air smelled of pine pitch and hot water. She had expected savage austerity from border rumor. What she found was order shaped by old grief. Memorial plaques set between doors, names hand-carved, offerings of dried mountain flowers beneath them. At the first stare, a contraction tightened her middle so fiercely she bent over with a gasp. Corvus dropped to her level without hesitation. "Look at me," he said. She did, because his tone left no space for pride. His eyes were no longer winter steel. Amber had bled into them, radiant at the center, the predator surfacing and then leashed again by sheer will. "Breathe with me. In, hold, out." She matched him, shaking. The pain ebbed by degrees. When she straightened, his hand hovered near her back, waiting. "I can walk," she whispered. "I believe you." He did not move his hand until she leaned, just a little, and gave permission without words. They entered the chamber he had promised. A wide room with low light, a hearth already lit, thick rugs over stone, and a bed built broad enough for rest without feeling like a sick bed. A copper kettle hissed over coals. Fresh water stood beside folded towels. Someone had set lavender and cedar at the windowsill, subtle against the sharper scent of antiseptic herbs. Thoughtful, efficient, prepared. Not improvised pity. A healer in plain brown robes waited by the hearth, silver hair braided tight against her scalp. She bowed first to Aurora, then to Corvus. "Midwife Mara," Corvus said, "you answer to high law in this case. No tincture, no examination, no procedure without explicit consent witnessed by Captain Ivar and me. Speak to the patient directly." Mara's lined face softened. "Lady Aurora, may I check your pulse and temperature?" Aurora nodded, surprised by the question being offered like respect rather than ritual. Mara's touch was firm but gentle, practiced without cruelty. She counted silently, then pressed a warmed cloth into Aurora's hands. Pulse fast from shock, fever low, cramping from stress and exposure. "Not active labor by what I can see now," Mara said. "I have a listening horn in my kit. If you consent, I will confirm both heartbeats here, in front of witnesses." Aurora looked to Corvus before she could stop herself. He caught that glance like it mattered. "Your choice," he said. "Yes," she said. "Do it." Mara worked carefully, asking before each movement. Aurora lay back, spine protesting, and stared at the carved rafters while the older woman positioned the horn against her abdomen. The room held stillness like a drawn bow. Then Mara smiled, fierce and bright. Two, distinct, strong. Captain Ivar exhaled audibly from the doorway. Corvus shut his eyes for one brief second, like a man hearing a verdict he had wagered his throne on. When he opened them, he was looking at Aurora, not the witnesses. "Recorded," he said to Ivar without turning his head. "Recorded," Ivar confirmed, and began writing on a wax tablet. The crux of her fear shifted then, not gone but rearranged. On the road, danger had been faceless and fast. Here it wore ledgers, titles, polished language. Here it could be dragged into light and named. Mara withdrew and busied herself at the kettle, giving them a pocket of privacy within protocol. Corvus remained where he stood, half a pace from the bedside, as if crossing that distance required as much permission as crossing a border. "What happened at Raven's Pass?" he asked. Aurora's throat tightened. Images rose sharp as broken glass. Moonlit snow turned to churned mud, horses screaming, her husband's hand shoving the satchel against her chest, men in border colors with treaty seals that should have been impossible to forge. "6 riders intercepted us before dawn," she said. "They wore neutral cloaks over armored sleeves. One had a council brand from my former pack. One had frostborn wax on his satchel buckle. They wanted the papers first. Then they wanted me alive." Corvus's jaw hardened. "Your husband's name?" "Leoric Donmir." Saying it out loud nearly broke her. "He held them long enough for me to reach the tree line." Corvus inclined his head, formal and grave. "Leoric Donmir will be named on our wall before moonset, if you consent." The offer struck her like a hand to the sternum. Widows in most territories were expected to disappear quietly, their dead folded into private shame or political inconvenience. Here, he offered witness. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you." His shoulders eased by a fraction, as if her yes mattered to him in ways rank could not explain. The bond between them pulsed again, subtle but undeniable, a low thrum under skin and bone. Aurora felt it and knew he felt it too from the way his breath caught. He took one step closer. "May I ask one more question that is not political?" She braced. "Ask." "When I touched you in the corridor," he said, voice almost unsteady now, "did you feel it as pain or as pull?" Her laugh came out thin with disbelief. "Both." For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. That tracks. The absurdity of it cracked the tension for a heartbeat, and she let out a ragged sound that might have been the beginning of laughter or tears. Corvus watched her like she was a language he refused to mistranslate. "Aurora," he said quietly, "I buried my mate 7 winters ago. I have not felt that bond since the pyre went cold. I am not careless with that word." The room narrowed to his face, his breath, the drumbeat in her ears. Fear rose, old and instinctive. So did hunger for safety she no longer trusted herself to want. "If this is real," she said, "it arrived at the worst possible time." "The worst possible time is usually when truth arrives," he answered. Their eyes locked then, and the rest of the chamber fell away. Hearth crackle, scratch of Ivar's stylus, wind against shutters. Her instincts sharpened, every nerve aware of distance and heat and the exact shape of his restraint. His pupils shifted again, amber deepening until they looked lit from within, and he drew a sharp breath as if scent alone had struck him. Aurora realized, with a shock that felt like grief turning inside out, that she was no longer only trying to survive the night. She was choosing, moment by moment, whom to trust with what remained of her life, with her dead mate's name, with 2 unborn heirs who had already been marked for erasure, with a bond she had not asked for and could not deny. Corvus lowered himself to one knee beside the bed, not in submission and not in dominance, but in deliberate equality. He offered his hand again, palm up, patient. "No vows tonight," he said. "No demands. Only this. You are under my protection until you tell me otherwise. Your no will be obeyed. Your evidence will be heard in open tribunal. And whoever paid a healer to poison your children will answer in daylight. Aurora looked at his hand, then at the signet ring resting in her cut palm, then at the king kneeling on stone as if crowns were lighter than promises. She set her hand in his once more. This time, she did not let go. Corvus's thumb shifted lightly over her knuckles, a silent acknowledgement rather than claim, and he rose with care, still angled so she could see every movement. Mara approached with a ceramic cup that steamed with ginger and mint. Aurora's body wanted sleep, food, distance, and vigilance all at once, a tangle of needs she no longer knew how to prioritize. Lady Aurora, Maera said, small sips first. Your stomach has been empty too long. Corvus looked at her, not the cup. Do you want privacy while you drink? The question startled her more than any command would have. Kings were not trained to ask less of frightened women. They were trained to take control and rename it necessity. Stay, she said, then winced at the roughness in her voice. He inclined his head once. I'll stay. She drank in careful swallows while Maera packed instruments and Captain Ivar recorded witness statements from the doorway. When the cup was empty, Mara touched the blanket near Aurora's ankles. Her feet are swollen from cold exposure and strain. If they are warmed too quickly, pain worsens. Cedar wraps, gradually heated. I'll do it, Corvus said. Mara lifted one brow. You have a council chamber full of wolves who believe the roof is on fire. Then they can practice patience. He accepted the bundle of folded cloths from her hands. Thank you, midwife. Mara's mouth twitched in approval, then she bowed to Aurora and withdrew, taking Ivar with her. The door closed with a muted thud, leaving hearthlight and wind hum in the shutters, and a king kneeling at the foot of Aurora's bed with a basin of warm water like a man in a cottage rather than a fortress. He paused with the first cloth in his hands. May I touch your left foot? She stared at him, exhausted enough to feel briefly unreal. You are asking permission to touch my foot. I am. His gaze remained steady. You have had too many hands on you today without choice. The knot behind her ribs loosened a fraction. Yes, she whispered. He cradled her heel with reverent restraint, as if he feared pressure might break more than skin. The warmth bit first, then soothed. Pain flared along cracked soles and bruised arches, then ebbed under the scent of cedar and steam. He worked in silence, changing cloths as they cooled, never assuming the next touch. Every time he needed to shift her ankle or adjust the blanket, he asked. By the time he finished the second foot, her breathing had slowed. The twins pressed low and then settled, as if listening. Corvus wrung out one last cloth and set it aside. I know this is not the question you want tonight, but it cannot wait long. The satchel. Aurora's hand tightened around the leather strap resting near her hip. Instinct rose hard and immediate. Mine. Last thing he gave me. Last proof. I am tired enough to hand him everything. That is exactly when women lose themselves. I know this pattern. A strong voice says rest, says trust me, says I will carry it for you. Then the papers vanish, and the story becomes whatever keeps power comfortable. If I sleep and wake empty-handed, lyric dies twice. If I clutch it until my fingers lock, I might still lose it. I need terms. I need witness. I need to remain a person in this room, not a vessel, not evidence, not an inconvenience wrapped in wool. Chain of custody in writing, she said. You read it with me present. 2 witnesses I choose. Nothing leaves this chamber without record. His expression did not harden, did not mock. If anything, it softened with respect. Done. You do not open it tonight. Done. She swallowed, surprised by the ease of his agreement. You're not going to argue? I could, he said, but I have no interest in winning against you. The words sat between them, heavy and clean. Outside, bells sounded once, then twice, marking the change of watch. By full dark, snow had begun tapping softly against the shutters, and the fortress seemed to draw inward around hearths and guarded doors. Corvus rose, crossed to the shelf, and returned with a carved wooden cup of water. He waited until she drank, then settled on the floor beside the bed, his back against cedar paneling, long legs stretched out with the controlled weariness of a man who had been in armor since dawn. "You should sleep in your own rooms," Aurora said. "Likely," he replied. "I won't." Her brow furrowed. "Because of the bond?" "Because someone tried to poison your pregnancy in my infirmary. The bond is a complication. Security is a decision." He leaned his head back against the wall and looked toward the hearth flames. "There is something else you should know, since everyone keeps speaking around it. Frostborn records widow names on the memorial wall. Not only warriors, mates too. Those who held households together while others bled at borders. Those who died carrying futures no one thought to honor." Aurora turned toward him despite herself. He began to recite names, voice low and unadorned, each syllable precise. Mira Ashford, Winter Plague, keeper of 6 fosterlings. Talia Frostborn, Avalanche Year, bridge engineer. Sarah Cold Harbor, childbirth fever, law clerk who rewrote inheritance codes. John Avail, border famine, granary steward. Name after name. Not rushed, not performed, like prayer offered to stone and memory alike. Aurora listened with tears she did not wipe away. No one in Bloodmoon had spoken widows aloud unless to count burden. When he stopped, she whispered, "Why do you remember all of them?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because forgetting is the first cruelty power commits." The room went still around that sentence. Fatigue finally dragged at her eyelids. Corvus noticed and stood, moving to dim a lamp. As he passed the bed, her hand twitched toward his sleeve without conscious thought, then stilled. He noticed that too and paused a careful distance away. "If you wake frightened," he said, "say my name or tell me to leave. Either will be obeyed." She slept in fragments, wind, then dark, then a dream of hooves and steel and lyric falling. In the dream, she ran uphill with lungs full of smoke, while a cup clinked against her teeth, and someone kept saying, "Drink, drink, drink." She jerked awake with a strangled gasp, arm flinging outward. Corvus was already up from the floor, but he stopped when she flinched. He did not reach for her. He stepped back until his shoulders touched the far wall, palms open at his sides, making himself smaller in a room he could have dominated by instinct alone. "I'm here," he said quietly. "No one is touching you." Her chest heaved. Shame flooded hot after fear. You thought you were under attack." "That is not failure." She pressed her hand to her face, then lowered it with an unsteady breath. "Most men would have grabbed me. Most men are afraid of waiting." Despite everything, a ragged laugh escaped her. "Are you always this composed?" He gave her a dry look. "I once terrified the Mountain Council into approving grain tariffs, then spent 3 hours trying to braid infant blankets for the nursery and tied them into knots that looked like battlefield snares. Composed is contextual." A real laugh broke from her then, brief and startled and precious. The sound seemed to arrest him. Something softened in his face so quickly she almost missed it. He returned to the floor by the bed only after she nodded permission. This time, when sleep came, it came deeper. At first, bell after dawn, servants brought fresh clothing in muted blue wool and a fur-lined cloak sized for her belly without comment or pity. Mara examined her again with witnesses present, confirmed both heartbeats, and approved a short walk if she avoided stairs. Captain Ivar arrived with a formal summons to noon assembly, where elders intended to challenge Corvus's handling of the infirmary scandal and, by extension, Aurora's place inside the fortress. "You can remain here," Corvus said when Ivar left. "I will answer them myself." Aurora looked at the sealed summons in her lap. No, They are already naming me in rooms I cannot enter. I am done being discussed like weather. A flicker of approval crossed his face. Then you will enter with me. The great hall held cold light and colder scrutiny. Frostborn banners fell in long silver-black lines from the rafters, and the semicircle of elders at the dais looked like carved granite wrapped in fur and rank. Warriors lined the side aisles shoulder to shoulder, and every scent in the room carried alertness sharpened toward confrontation. Aurora stepped in on Corvus's arm, satchel strap across her chest, Leoric's ring now on a chain at her throat. Murmurs rose at once. There she is. Blood Moon Widow. Curse Carrier. Look how far she is. Convenient timing for heirs. Corvus did not quicken his pace. He guided her to the raised platform, then did something that made the murmurs fracture into stunned silence. He ordered a second carved chair brought and set it beside his throne, equal height, equal distance to the assembly floor. Elder Varen, thin and iron-haired, struck his staff against stone. This is irregular. Corvus sat only after Aurora sat. So is attempted fetal poisoning by royal staff. Another elder, Malus in mourning gray, narrowed her eyes at Aurora's abdomen. There are whispers she carries a dead man's curse, confinement until birth would protect the pack. Aurora felt heat climb her spine, anger and dread braided tight. Before she could answer, Corvus rose. His wolf presence rolled through the hall, not wild, not theatrical, but absolute. He stepped behind Aurora's chair and leaned close enough that his breath warmed the crown of her head. Then he let his scent spread. Cedar and winter smoke and dominant certainty, a deliberate shield wrapping her from shoulder to knee. The effect was immediate. Several voices cut off mid-word. Let the record state, Corvus said, voice carrying to the far doors, that I have placed royal scent shield upon Lady Aurora Bloodmoon under high law. Any insult to her body is entered as insult to future royal blood and to my crown. Challenge her evidence if you dare. You do not dehumanize her in my hall. Captain Dren, broad-chested and loud, barked a short laugh from the warrior ranks. With respect, my king, she crossed half a mountain and nearly collapsed in a corridor. She is no threat and no asset. She is weak. Corvus turned his head slightly. Come forward. Dren obeyed, confidence still stamped across his face. I spoke plain. You did, Corvus said. Now we test the accuracy of your judgment. He looked to Aurora. Your terms. The hall pivoted toward her as one organism. She felt the old urge to shrink, to survive by minimizing herself. It rose and met the memory of cedar cloths, asked permissions, open palms, widows named aloud. She stood slowly, one hand braced at the arm of her chair. No striking my body, she said. No contact above the shoulders, no forced shift. Trial by strategy in the lower training court, using terrain markers. He gets size and speed. I get route choice and 3 obstacles of my selecting. Dren scoffed. A game. A lawful test, Corvus corrected. Accepted. They moved to the lower court, a circular space ringed by stone pillars and painted boundary lines used for youth war drills. Aurora chose her obstacles with quick precision. 2 movable shield walls and a rope-lashed cart axle from the armory, all placed to create choke points. She had memorized terrain while running for her life. Narrow passages and blind turns had kept her breathing. She would use the same logic now. Corvus stood at the boundary as arbiter, voice like iron. No contact with her abdomen, no strikes to head or throat. Violate terms and you forfeit rank. The whistle sounded. Dren lunged with brute confidence, expecting panic. Aurora moved early, not fast enough to outrun him in open ground, but exact enough to never give him open ground. She slipped behind the first shield wall, forced him to angle wide, baited him toward the cart axle, then yanked the release knot she had checked with her own hands. The axle rolled, clipped his shin, and stole his balance long enough for her to tag the finish post with her palm and speak clear for all to hear. Objective secured. Silence, then a ripple of startled voices. Dren pushed up, furious and embarrassed, but Corvus was already between them, one hand raised in warning. Trial complete, he said. Result: Aurora Bloodmoon outmaneuvered a Frostborn captain under agreed terms. Let this correct any confusion between injury and weakness. Dren lowered his head. Acknowledged. Back in the Great Hall, the tone had shifted by degrees, both subtle and undeniable. Not warm. Not yet, but attentive instead of dismissive. When Elder Malus spoke again, the accusation had thinned into procedure. If she remains, Malus said, what is her status pending tribunal? Aurora opened her mouth, but Corvus looked to her first, giving choice before decree. She straightened in the chair beside his throne. My status is witness and claimant, she said. I brought evidence under your law. I will present it under your law. I ask protection for my children and due process for the dead. Corvus's gaze held hers, proud and fierce in equal measure. Granted. As the assembly adjourned, wolves who had refused to meet her eyes now nodded, some stiffly, some with genuine respect, not yet polished by comfort. Corvus offered his forearm as they stepped down from the dais. Aurora hesitated only a heartbeat before taking it, her guard not gone, but lowered enough to let warmth in. Corvus kept his forearm steady as they crossed the hall, and Aurora felt the shift in the crowd as clearly as temperature. Respect had not become trust, but contempt had lost its easy footing. Wolves moved aside instead of forcing her to thread between shoulders. No one called her cursed again. At the doors, Captain Ivar met them with 2 scribes, wax tablets, and the older sentry who had pulled her from the boundary stones. Up close, the man looked more worn than she remembered, deep lines at the corners of his eyes and dried snow still clinging to the seam of his cloak. I am Garen Thorn, he said, fist to heart. You asked for witnesses of your choosing. If you'll have me, I stand. And me, said Mara, arriving with ink-stained fingers and a ledger tucked under her arm. Medical witness and midwife record. Aurora nodded. Both of you. They assembled in a small law chamber off the western stair, where cold light from narrow windows cut across a long cedar table. Ivar broke the satchel seal only after reading the chain of custody terms aloud, each transfer marked with time, hands, and purpose. Corvus stood at Aurora's right shoulder but did not touch her. He did not need to. She could feel his focus like a shield held just above skin. Inside the satchel lay what Leoric had died protecting. 2 folded dispatches stamped with smeared border wax, a ledger strip torn from a payment book, 3 wooden treaty counters used by patrol commanders, and a strip of cured hide incised with names and dates. There was blood on everything. On the second dispatch, there was also a mark she recognized immediately, even before Ivar read the signature. Raven Valewood. The room seemed to narrow around that name. Aurora's breath caught, and memory arrived with teeth. Black hair braided in war knots, a smile that could charm a council and terrify a novice. The day he had looked at her in front of their old pack and called her defective because she had failed to shift on command. He had cut their youthful bond with ceremony and applause. Years later, when she built a quieter life with Leoric, Raven had sent word once, testing, and she had burned the letter unopened. She had believed distance was enough. Corvus's voice came low. You know him? Too well. She forced her hand flat on the table to stop the tremor. Former Alpha of Valewood Reach. He rejects what cannot serve him, then rewrites history so it looks strategic. His pack has been losing land for 3 winters. Trade routes closed. Hunting failures. He needs legitimacy, or he'll be replaced. Ivar set the ledger strip under magnifying glass. Payment notation to an initialed recipient. ES. 3 transfers over 2 moons. Source account routed through a shell trader in South Pass. Elidra Sorn, Mara said, jaw hardening. Garen swore softly. He bought a royal doctor. Corvus read the hide strip in silence, then handed it to Aurora. It listed patrol changes, infirmary staffing, and one line that made her blood run cold. Blood moon twin gestation, week markers, window for intervention before quickening patterns public. He didn't just hire blades, she said. He studied pregnancy medicine, timing, access points. And court law, Corvus added, tapping the bottom of Raven's dispatch. He cites reclamation custom from pre-unification codes, claims prior mate right if bond marks remain and current mate is deceased. Aurora laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. A right he surrendered when he rejected me. He will argue technicality, that the rejection severed affection, not legal imprint. Corvus's gaze lifted to hers. Cold fury banked behind discipline. He wants you named as property and the twins named as succession assets. Silence held for 2 breaths, then 3. I am not shaking because I fear him more than before. I am shaking because this has shape now. A man, a method, a timetable. When danger was faceless, survival was movement. Now survival is testimony, law, and standing still while strangers debate my body. I want to run until the mountains erase my scent. I want to lock the door and sleep for a week with my hand over my belly and no one asking for proof of what I know. But if I run, he writes the story alone. If I hide, he names that guilt. Lyric died to put these papers in daylight. I will not carry them this far only to disappear when they begin to matter. Corvus turned to Ivar. Immediate orders. Verify every treaty seal in this packet against archive originals. Audit gate logs for the last 30 days. Double guard on Elidra and isolate her from all outside contact. Ivar bowed. Done. To the archive master, Corvus continued, no one cites pre-unification mate law without full context added to the record. I want precedent on consent rulings by dusk. Mara leaned in, eyes on Aurora. And I want every tonic in obstetrics tested by 2 independent healers before use. Corvus nodded once. Approved. By the time evening snow began to collect along the outer parapets, the fortress had shifted into quiet emergency, messengers moving at a run, bells carrying coded sequences instead of ceremonial chimes. Aurora stood at the memorial wall with a wool cloak around her shoulders, while a stonecarver finished the final letter in Lyric Dawnmere's name. Corvus remained half a step behind her, close enough for warmth, far enough for choice. When the chisel lifted, she touched the fresh-cut grooves with her fingertips and let herself cry without apology. You kept your promise, she said. I said I would. She turned. Hearthlight from the corridor caught in his eyes, turning the amber in them almost molten. The mate pull between them had become less like lightning and more like a tide, steady and insistent, a pressure that did not demand but did not recede. It frightened her in a different way than Raven frightened her. Raven was conquest dressed as law. Corvus was patience that made room for her to answer honestly, and that was harder to defend against. Do you ever regret feeling it? She asked. The bond. With me. With this chaos tied to my name. His mouth tightened, then eased. I regret the harm that reached you before I knew. I do not regret knowing. She looked away first. At supper, she managed broth, bread, and half a pear before nausea chased appetite. Corvus ate little himself, spending most of the meal fielding reports from Ivar and 2 legal clerks. The first seal comparison came back. 1 treaty counter in her satchel was authentic. 2 were precise forgeries made from copied molds. The second report was worse. A rumor campaign had already spread through lower barracks claiming Aurora had lied about paternity and fabricated the ambush to gain royal status. The language matched pamphlets seized months earlier from Valewood couriers. "He is preparing witnesses before he appears," Ivar said. "If public opinion fractures, tribunal becomes theater." "Then we deny him theater and force evidence," Corvus replied. A knock interrupted them. Garen entered carrying a narrow wooden box bound in plain twine. "Delivered to the south gate by a boy from the market quarter," he said. "No crest, no sender. Gate guards checked for poison. Clean." Aurora knew before it opened. Her stomach went hard and cold. Corvus set the box on the table, looked at her, and waited for consent. "Open it," she said. Inside lay a carved wolf tooth, polished to a pale sheen, with Leoric's initials cut near the root. Beneath it, a scrap of hide with neat script burned in iron gall. "I took your past, and I will take your future." No signature. None needed. The room went still in the way rooms did before storms broke. Corvus's fingers curled around the edge of the table until wood creaked. Aurora lifted the tooth with both hands and pressed it to her sternum, breath shuddering. "He had this from the road," she said. "He kept it. For timing." Corvus's voice dropped to something dangerous and precise. "He is inside our information net at minimum. Maybe inside these walls." Ivar was already turning. "I'll lock internal gates and start room sweeps." "Do it quietly," Corvus said. "No panic. Increase Aurora's guard rotation with wolves she has already met. No unfamiliar faces at her door." Ivar left at a run. Later that night, Aurora could not sleep. The tooth lay wrapped in linen beside Leoric's ring, two relics of love and violence sharing the same small table. Corvus sat in the chair near the hearth, reading legal excerpts by lamplight, refusing rest while she paced in thick socks across the rug. Every few minutes she pressed her palm to her belly and counted movements. One, then another. Strong, present. "He's forcing full moon timing," she said at last. "Counterfeit claim rights require witness quorum and moonlight. If he can drag this into ritual frame, facts become secondary." Corvus closed the folio. "Then we seize the frame before he does." She stopped pacing. "How?" "Sacred stone tribunal. Truth binding under ancestral witness. No private bargain, no corridor verdict. Public record, binding law." He stood, crossed to her, and stopped within arm's reach. "It is dangerous. He will perform outrage for the crowd. But in that circle, forged claims can be broken in front of everyone." Fear moved through her like ice water. So did resolve. "And if I refuse?" "Refusal lets him argue concealment." Corvus's jaw set. "I won't lie to comfort you. Refusal costs us ground." 3 days passed under tightening protocol, and every hour sharpened the sense that pressure was building toward a single fracture point. Elidra, under separate questioning by Maera and legal clerks, admitted receiving money from intermediaries, but claimed she believed the tincture was merely sedative. Seal analysis tied one intermediary ledger to a Valewood trade captain. 2 kitchen staff were caught passing rumor slips to off-duty guards and confessed they had been paid in silver marked with old Valewood minting. Each admission added weight, none yet enough to end the case. On the 3rd evening, as snow turned to freezing rain against the fortress roofs, the strike came. The outer horn sounded a 3-note sequence reserved for diplomatic entry under protest. Ivar arrived at Aurora's chamber with rain on his cloak and controlled alarm in his face. "Envoy at the east gate," he said. Valewood colors hidden under neutral cloaks. They carry a writ bearing forged treaty authority and an attached petition invoking reclamation custom. They demand immediate audience. Corvus was already fastening his bracers. "Who leads them?" Ivar's expression darkened. "Raven Valewood, in person." Aurora felt the twins shift hard at once, a synchronized thud beneath her ribs. Corvus looked at her, All command stripped to one raw question. Do you want to face him now? She thought of running, of walls, of mountain roads and breath tearing in her throat. She thought of Leoric's name in stone, of a doctor's vial, of a carved tooth delivered like a promise. When she spoke, her voice was steady enough to surprise her. I face him where law can see us, not in a corridor, not in private. Corvus nodded. Then we go to the East Audience Court. Full guard. Recorded. They entered the court to torchlight and rain-scented air. Raven stood at the far end between two self-important witnesses in magistrate gray, tall and immaculate despite the weather. Dark hair braided with silver rings of rank he had no right to wear in Frostborn territory. His smile was the same one Aurora remembered from years ago, polished and predatory, as if history were a game he always expected to win. Aurora, he said, savoring her name. You look better fed than when you left. Corvus stepped forward, but Aurora lifted a hand, and he held position at her side. Raven's gaze dropped to her abdomen, lingered, returned to her face. I am invoking lawful reclamation and paternal succession claim. You carry Blood Moon twins, my heirs by prior bond and mark. Return with me willingly, and this can remain civil. Aurora felt nausea rise and pass. You rejected that bond before witnesses. You forfeited every right with it. I relinquished sentiment, not lineage. He produced a parchment with an elaborate seal. By moon custom, unresolved prior claims can be ratified on full moon before assembled pacts. I have witnesses ready. Decline, and your refusal is entered as concealment. Corvus took the parchment, skimmed, and handed it to Ivar for record. Forgery in half the citations. Raven smiled wider. Then prove it in the circle, unless your king prefers to hide you. The insult was bait. Corvus did not bite. Aurora did. No one is hiding me, she said, stepping one pace forward. You want a circle. You will have one. Raven's eyes gleamed. At last. He bowed with theatrical courtesy, then turned to leave. At the threshold, he looked back over his shoulder and spoke softly enough that only Aurora and Corvus heard. I told you. Past and future. When the doors shut behind him, thunder rolled across the mountain and the court seemed to tilt into a new gravity. Ivar broke the silence first. Full moon is tomorrow night. Corvus exhaled once, hard. Then tomorrow night we end this. Aurora pressed her hand to the life moving beneath it and lifted her chin toward the storm, knowing the next time she stood before Raven, it would be on sacred stone with every eye in the realm on her blood, her truth, and whether law would finally choose a woman over the man who claimed to own her. Aurora held Corvus's gaze until the tremor in her hand settled, then lowered her palm from her belly and turned back toward the center of the court, where rainwater still glistened in the grooves between stone tiles. Then write this now, she said to Ivar. I do not consent to private arbitration. I do not consent to closed testimony. I request sacred stone tribunal under full moon witness, with archive verification and medical testimony attached. Ivar's stylus was moving before she finished. Entered. Corvus stepped beside her, shoulder nearly touching hers, his presence a steady pressure that did not crowd. Add royal protection order. Add charge expansion, attempted coerced miscarriage, fraudulent treaty use, succession manipulation, and threat against unborn heirs. Entered, Ivar repeated. The east doors opened again to admit Elder Malus, two legal clerks, and Mara, with a leather case of sealed vials tucked under one arm. Mara's mouth tightened when she saw Aurora's face. He sent something else? She asked. The tooth is already logged, Aurora said. He wanted me frightened and impulsive. He is getting lawful and public instead. Mara gave one hard nod. Good. I have toxicology confirmation from Elidra's seized tinctures. 2 contain abortifacient resin strong enough to trigger hemorrhaging at this stage. Results witnessed by 3 healers. Corvus looked to the clerks. Those findings lead the medical sequence tomorrow, not buried at the end. One clerk hesitated. Tomorrow's tribunal docket is already overfull with winterland disputes. Rescheduling elder petitions may cause unrest. Corvus's eyes went cold. Then let unrest learn priority. They moved from the audience court to the archive wing under doubled guard, boots striking quick rhythms through vaulted passages lit with blue resin lamps. Aurora walked between Corvus and Mara, satchel strap across her chest, Leoric's ring warm against her skin beneath wool. Every few doors they passed sentries who straightened and bowed. No one reached for her. No one tried to steer her elsewhere. The difference from the infirmary corridor was so stark, it felt like stepping between worlds built from the same stone. In the archive chamber, Ivar laid out each recovered item beneath weighted glass while scribes copied marks and seals into duplicate ledgers. Garen provided his boundary statement in full. Mara entered her medical record with signatures from independent witnesses. Elidra's payment trail was pinned to Valewood intermediaries by coin mint, trade stamp, and route logs. By the time the final wax impression cooled, the evidentiary chain was no longer fragile or personal. It was institutional. Hard to erase, harder to dismiss. Raven struck first anyway. The alarm came as a low horn pulse from the north corridor, not the high blast of open assault, but the clipped call used for internal breach. A runner skidded into the archive doorway, breath smoking. 3 magistrate greys at the lower scriptorium, he said. They brought copied writs and tried to compel seal transfer for tomorrow's claim register. 2 had concealed blades. Ivar cursed under his breath and looked to Corvus. Alive? Corvus ordered. Disarm and detain. Seize the writs intact. The runner vanished. Aurora stared at the table where Raven's forged citations lay beside genuine law. He wanted his version in the official record before moonrise. He wanted confusion to look like legitimacy, Corvus said. And panic to push us into mistakes, she added. He turned toward her, and for a beat, the king's command mask thinned into something rawer. I can still move you to the mountain keep tonight. No one would call it cowardice. She heard the offer for what it was, protection without pressure. She also heard the cost. If she vanished now, Raven would call it admission. No, she said. If I leave the circle, he gets the story. Corvus exhaled once. Then we hold the circle. By the time the moon cleared the eastern crags the next night, Frostborn's sacred stone basin blazed with torchlight and silver runes, every tier crowded with witnesses from 3 territories, elders in ceremonial fur, warriors in dark leathers, healers in plain robes, and scribes kneeling at carved record slabs. Snowmelt ran in thin threads between the old stones, reflecting moonlight like broken glass. Aurora stood at the south mark wrapped in black wool lined with white fox, her hand resting low where the twins shifted in firm, synchronized rolls. Corvus stood 1 pace behind and right, as protocol required for a king who was party to law, but not its source. Across the ring, Raven Valewood entered with 2 appointed advocates, and 6 loyalists wearing neutral cloaks over Valewood knotwork. He looked polished enough for coronation, hair braided with silver rings, jaw clean, smile precise. When his gaze found Aurora, it sharpened with possession, not surprise. The high adjudicator, Elder Thessa, raised a carved staff. Under moon witness and ancestral law, this tribunal hears claims of succession, coercion, and oath-breaking. False testimony binds the tongue and burns the mark of liar. Let each party speak once before evidence. Raven stepped forward first, voice smooth enough to travel to the highest tier without strain. I come as prior bonded alpha under neglected custom. The woman Aurora Bloodmoon carries lineage tied to my mark. Her current protector seeks to absorb that lineage through political mating and fabricated scandal. I request immediate custodial transfer and ritual confirmation of inherited claim. Murmurs rippled. One of his loyalists lifted a sealed parchment toward the scribes, then another. Duplicate claim packets. Rapid file strategy. Force volume. Overwhelm scrutiny. Thessa struck her staff once. Packets received for review, not acceptance. Aurora felt heat pulse beneath her skin, not fear exactly, more like an old wound recognizing the hand that made it. Raven's eyes slid to her abdomen and lingered, measuring. She fought the urge to fold inward around that look. Corvus leaned just close enough for her to hear. "You are not alone in this circle." "I know," she whispered, and stepped forward when Thessa signaled. "I reject his claim in full," Aurora said, voice carrying clearer than she expected. "He publicly rejected our bond years ago before pack witnesses. He forfeited legal and social standing with that rejection. He now seeks reclamation through forged citations and medical coercion, arranged with a paid physician who declared my children dead while preparing abortive tincture." Raven's expression remained composed, but his nostrils flared. Accusation without direct proof. Aurora lifted her chin. "Then bind it in truth." Thessa gestured to the central stone. "Blood witness may be invoked." Corvus's hand flexed at his side. Aurora did not look back at him. She walked to the center basin where ancient runes spiraled around a shallow depression darkened by centuries of oath blood. Mara approached with a sterile blade and paused. "Your consent," Mara said softly. Aurora held out her palm. "Given." The cut was quick and bright. Blood welled, then fell in 3 drops to the stone. The runes answered with a low silver glow that crawled outward like frost veins across winter glass. A collective breath passed through the crowd. Aurora pressed her bleeding hand flat to the carved center and closed her eyes. "I am terrified. I am furious. I am done yielding the shape of my life to men who call possession tradition. Let it work. Let them see what he paid for." The blood moon inheritance rose through her like river current striking a locked gate, pressure building, then breaking. Light climbed her arm in pale threads, gathered at her sternum, and spilled outward in a widening arc over the tribunal floor. Images formed in suspended shimmer above the central stone. Raven in a shuttered side room, cloak hood down, face unmistakable. Elidra across a table with her healer pins visible. A ledger strip exchanged. A vial tapped once against wood. Raven's voice, crisp as cut glass. "No miscarriage, no coin. I need both heirs removed before quickening is public." Elidra's answer followed, thin with calculation. "Timing is narrow." "Then do not miss." The projection snapped to a second memory. Raven's signet pressed into wax over forged legal citations, his advocate reciting pre-unification clauses, while crossing out consent addenda in red ink. Third image, Leoric's carved tooth in Raven's hand, turned like a trophy before being boxed for delivery. Gasps broke across the tiers. One of Raven's own advocates took a stumbling step back. Mara covered her mouth with trembling fingers, eyes wet and furious. Raven lunged toward the projection, shouting, "Fabricated witchlight!" Thessa's staff struck stone. "Hold position." Raven ignored her and moved faster, shoulders rolling as partial shift tore through restraint. His canines lengthened, dark fur crept along his jaw and forearms, claws split the seams at his fingertips. He drove for Aurora with predatory intent plain as sunrise. Chaos detonated around the ring. Warriors surged to the boundary lines. Corvus moved at the same instant, a blur of black and silver, but Aurora threw up her uncut hand and shouted, "Stand down, Corvus! Let law see him!" The words landed like a command born from the stone itself. Corvus checked his motion one stride from impact range, body coiled, eyes burning. Aurora planted her feet at the center mark, blood still on the runes, and reached for the silver current roaring through her veins. "By moon witness," she said, voice rough with effort, I bind Oathbreaker until verdict. Runes flared. Chains of white-silver light erupted from carved channels around Raven's boots and wrists, wrapping him mid-charge and slamming him to one knee hard enough to crack old mortar. He snarled and strained, muscles standing out in his neck, one chain already splintering under raw alpha strength. Thessa's voice rang out. Recorded aggression against bonded mother under tribunal protection. Add child threatener charge. Raven ripped one arm free with a sound like tearing metal and surged again, half-shifted and wild-eyed. Corvus stepped in this time, but Aurora moved first. She stepped into Raven's line, pulled Leoric's widow ring from beneath her cloak, and closed her blood-slick fist around it. Grief, rage, and memory braided into a single clear vector. The ring ignited white gold, brighter than torch fire, and she drove that light forward into the space between them. It struck Raven's chest and throat in a clean vertical flash, a dark brand on Aurora's collarbone, old and half-faded from long-ago bond rites, burned, lifted, and dissolved into ash-like sparks that vanished before they fell. Raven screamed and dropped to both knees, claws gouging stone, eyes wide with sudden fear as tribunal sigils blazed across the floor and climbed his skin. Oathbreaker! The runes pulsed. Child threatener! Answered the outer ring. Raven looked up at her, breath ragged, lips peeled back. You were always meant to crawl back. Aurora's voice came steady as steel drawn true. I buried crawling with my husband. You are beneath mourning. Thessa raised her staff. Tribunal finds Raven Valewood guilty on all counts. Sentence: death by sovereign execution, witnessed and entered. Corvus did not hesitate. He crossed the last distance in 2 strides, drew the short execution blade from his belt, and ended Raven with one sanctioned, precise strike across the throat. Raven toppled sideways onto the wet stone, breath gone, body still. No flourish, no second blow. Law carried out. Silence followed, huge and ringing, broken only by Aurora's breathing and the hiss of torches in wind. Then the scribes began reading the verdict into record, voice after voice, each clause anchored to evidence. The satchel documents, the seal analysis, Mara's toxicology reports, Elidra's payments, Garen's witness statement, the projected memory under blood oath, the attempted assault in open circle. Nothing left to rumor. Nothing left to private distortion. Corvus turned to Aurora, blade already lowered, his face spattered only with rain and moonlight. He stopped just short of touching her. Are you hurt? She shook her head, then laughed once through tears she did not bother hiding. Furious, shaking, standing. A faint, disbelieving smile touched his mouth. Standing counts. Around them, Frostborn warriors dropped to one knee. Elders followed, then visiting delegates, a wave of acknowledgement moving tier by tier until the entire stone basin had bowed before the woman at its center, blood on her palm, widow ring blazing warm in her hand, and 2 heartbeats alive and undeniable beneath her own. Aurora stood in the center of the basin while the kneeling tears held their breath, and the first thing she felt was not triumph, but the raw tremor that came after survival. Her cut palm still bled in a thin line over Leoric's ring. The twins rolled once, then settled, as if the storm inside her had finally found shore. Corvus remained a step away, waiting, not touching. Rain beating on his jaw and throat, where moonlight turned each drop to silver. Elder Thessa lowered her staff and looked directly at Aurora. The sentence is carried out. The circle is closed unless either bonded party petitions sacred witness for a claiming. A murmur traveled through the outer rows, then faded. Corvus's gaze did not leave Aurora's face. He sank to one knee on the wet stone, crown and command and every watching eye forgotten, and set his execution blade on the ground between them, hilt toward her. Aurora Blood Moon, he said, voice unsteady in a way she had never heard from him. "I ask consent under witness, not as king over subject, but as male to female, heart to heart. Will you accept my mark and give yours in return? No cages, no erasure, no ownership. Only matehood, if it is what you want." The basin seemed to narrow to his breath and hers. She could feel her pulse in her wounded palm, in her throat, in the bond thread already humming between them with bright, relentless clarity. For one suspended moment, Leoric's memory rose, not as barrier, but blessing, the last good man's laugh warming the edge of grief. She pressed the widow's ring to her lips, then closed her fingers around it and nodded. "Yes," she said, and her voice carried to every stone. "I choose you. I choose this. Mine by choice, yours by choice, mate by vow." Corvus's eyes closed briefly at the words, like relief landing where fear had lived. He stood and approached only when she lifted her chin to him. His hand came up, hovering beside her neck until she leaned into his palm. His thumb brushed rain and tears from her skin. "Say stop at any point," he whispered. "I will." Her fingers found his wrist and held. "Do not stop." He bent his head to the junction of her neck and shoulder. His breath was warm against chilled skin, and then his teeth pierced with one clean, deliberate pressure that flashed pain down her spine, sharp and bright, enough to wrench a sound from her throat. The pain lasted a heartbeat. 2. Then it changed. Heat flooded outward from the bite, not burning, but expanding, wave after wave through chest, belly, limbs, until she felt as if moonlight had poured through every hollow place and filled it with fierce, living gold. The twins kicked together, hard enough to make her gasp against his shoulder. A low sound escaped Corvus, half reverence, half surrender. Through the bond, she felt him receiving her too. Her terror on the border road, her stubborn refusal to drink poison, the weight of Leoric's ring, the first laugh beside a cedar-warmed bed, the iron decision to stand in the circle. He did not flinch from any of it. He took it in and answered with his own flood of truth. 7 winters of disciplined grief. Nights of ruling through hunger and restraint. The instant in the corridor when 2 hidden heartbeats reordered his world. The vow he had made to protect, without possessing. He lifted his head. A crescent mark, dark and new, bloomed where his bite had sealed. She touched it with shaking fingers. The bond pulsed, steadying her. "Mine," he breathed, forehead against hers. She gave a ragged laugh through tears. "Yours." Then she cupped his face, guided him lower, and turned him with a firm hand at his shoulder. "My turn." The crowd had gone utterly silent. Corvus bared the line where neck met shoulder and held still, massive body taut with trust. Aurora pressed her mouth to his skin first, tasting rain and salt and wolf. When she bit, she did it with intention, not imitation, teeth sinking through thick muscle until he exhaled hard and gripped her waist to stay grounded. The answering rush through the bond struck like a bell. His strength poured into her in luminous currents, not overwhelming, but interwoven. Cedar smoke, winter wind, disciplined fury, and a tenderness he showed only when no one was looking. Her own power rose to meet it, blood moon silver braided with frostborn amber, grief and hope, no longer enemies, but alloy. Corvus shuddered once, then rested his brow against hers again, both of them breathing hard. "Mate," he said, the word rough and awed. "Mate," she answered. Around them, wolves who had witnessed war and tribunal and execution now bowed lower, not to fear, but to recognition. Elder Thessa struck her staff one final time. Mutual claiming witnessed and entered, bond complete. Corvus wrapped his cloak around Aurora's shoulders and drew her carefully against his chest, One hand splayed over the curve of her belly where their children moved in calm, answering rhythms. For a long moment they simply stood there, held together while the bond settled from wildfire to heartbeat, from shock to home. By dawn 3 days later, the Great Hall had been transformed from tribunal chamber to covenant court, every bench filled, every brazier lit against mountain cold. Aurora stood on the dais in deep midnight wool, her marks visible at her throat, Leoric's ring now set into a silver chain woven beside frostborn runic links, so memory and future rested together over her heart. Corvus stood at her left, not in front, not above. Captain Ivar read the finalized judgments in a voice that never wavered. Elidra Sorn, stripped and tried under high law, was sentenced to permanent exile beyond all Allied territories after full confession of paid malpractice. Her ledgers, vials, and correspondence were sealed in the Royal Archive for legal training and future prevention. The seized abortive tinctures were catalogued and publicly destroyed under Mayera's supervision in the infirmary yard before witnesses. Raven's forged writs and treaty counters were entered into the fraud registry. The single authentic counter was returned to Frostborn Border Command with amended seal protocol. The carved tooth and both dispatches were placed in the memorial vault under Leoric Donmir's name by Aurora's request, so evidence and remembrance could not be separated again. Then Mara stepped forward with a new charter bearing 5 authority marks, including Elder Malus. Elder Varen remained off-page, represented only by his previously lodged council seal, while the present signatories stood solemn as they pressed wax to parchment. No pregnant wolf, of any rank, could be examined, medicated, or confined without witnessed consent and second healer confirmation. Any violation became a crown crime. Mara was appointed High Matron of the Reformed Healer Council, with Garen assigned as Patient Rights Marshal at infirmary gates. Dren, red-faced but sincere, knelt and asked Aurora's pardon for calling her weak. She granted it and ordered him to train young guards in strategic restraint, not brute display. He accepted with a hand over his heart. Elder Thessa lifted the lunar circlet, ancient silver inset with obsidian. Aurora Bloodmoon, by tribunal legitimacy, covenant law, and witnessed mate bond, do you accept the mantle of High Luna Queen in your own right? Aurora looked across the hall at faces that had doubted, tested, and finally chosen accountability. She looked at Corvus, whose expression held pride without possession. She thought of the boundary stones, the infirmary vial, the circle, the bite that had remade fear into belonging. I accept, she said. The circlet settled against her brow. The hall knelt as one. On the first thaw morning of spring, sunlight spilled through nursery windows and painted moving bands of gold over carved cedar walls. Aurora reclined against piled quilts, hair unbound, 2 newborns bundled against her chest, one dozing, one blinking solemnly at the world that had nearly denied both their first breaths. Their heartbeats were strong under her palms, stubborn and bright as ever. Corvus sat beside her, sleeve rolled, tiny fingers wrapped around one scarred thumb. His mark at the neck had healed to a pale crescent. So had hers. He leaned in and kissed Aurora's temple with quiet reverence. Still standing? He murmured. She smiled, tired and incandescent. Standing, holding, ruling. Mara entered with a ledger and warm broth, scolding gently about rest while checking both infants with practiced hands and obvious joy. Ivar waited at the door with morning reports, announcing that Blood Moon Loyalist families had crossed safely into unified territory under the new covenant. Garen delivered the final note. No unresolved claims remained in tribunal queue tied to Raven's network. The last paid rumor agents had confessed and been sentenced to labor service rebuilding border clinics. No hidden threads, no unfinished writs. When the chamber doors opened for formal presentation, the pack gathered in the sunlit courtyard below the royal balcony. Aurora stepped out first with the twins in her arms, Corvus at her side, and half a pace behind, exactly as they had agreed. The crowd bowed, then rose to a roar of welcome that shook banners against the spring wind. She looked down at the kneeling wolves, then at the children, then at the male who had heard 2 heartbeats when others heard none. Corvus placed his hand over hers where it covered both small bodies. The bond between them moved in a calm, luminous rhythm, settled and sure. Not rescue, not debt, shared rule, chosen every day.